Hello and a very warm welcome to Ravensbourne University, London, and to this In Conversation series. And I'm delighted that I have Matt Marsh with us today, and we're going to be talking about lots of interesting things. My name is Paul Sternberg. I'm the Director of Postgraduate Studies at Ravensbourne. Matt, welcome to Ravensbourne. You're familiar with Ravensbourne. You know Ravensbourne. You knew Ravensbourne before it moved to the Greenwich Peninsula, so you've got quite an interesting history, and you're a visiting professor here as well.
All of these things are true.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, goes back, my relationship with this organisation goes back at least 15 years.
Yes.
And what's sort of interesting about that is how one has to change what you teach.
Yes.
As time has evolved. So, at one point it used to be kind of human-centered design, and then it kind of moved on into kind of more design strategy, and then it moved on into other aspects of innovation and business and so forth. And I'm guessing we're probably going to have to update what we're going to be teaching moving on and forwards, just to keep up with the times, because the industry changes so quickly, and students need to be equipped with different skills and perspectives to react to that. So it's always a moving target.
And I mean, it's interesting because from your point of view, your own kind of professional journey as well, I suppose, you know, as a designer, you have had to adapt and change and kind of, be a bit kind of ducking and diving. And tell us a little bit about your journey as a designer, Matt.
Well, I mean, first of all, the real truth of it is, I think, is probably to fess up and say, whilst I've worked in design and design consulting, I did not train as a designer.
So you're not a designer?
I don't know. I actually studied the behavioural sciences.
Right. Yeah.
Back years ago, and I sort of fell into the world of design and making things when I was doing my final year project. And what I decided to take on was how to design something that helped people learn how to swim. Right. And I discovered by trial and error that the various things that were out there at that time didn't work.
This is for swimming in swimming pools?
Swimming pools. So for people who could not swim, how do you get them to teach them to swim? And so I finally kind of discovered this world of design and making things.
Yes.
And fairly shortly after I graduated, I set up my own business, and I was selling my sort of behavioural sciences, ergonomics services to various folk. And there was an interesting formative experience for me that happened. And I was asked to go in and ensure that a paper towel dispenser could be used. Yeah. And so I did the right things, and I did user trials and so forth. And I found out that what happened was that the engineers had placed the cutting blade at the wrong angle. So what happened, instead of when you pulled out the paper, and you pulled it to tear it off, you just ended up with reams of paper all over the floor. So I then said to them, I said, this is the problem. And they said to me, that's a bit of a problem, because we've already designed and done the engineering, and we've already tooled it. And for me, that was a real aha moment, because I realized that if I wanted to have impact, I needed to move further up the chain of how things were made. And
further up, but also further back, isn't it? Like at the more beginning.
That's what I mean by back up the chain. Yes. So getting earlier on. Yeah. And that took me to a firm called IDEO. I was out in the United States, in the Bay Area, throughout the 90s. And I had the opportunity then to work very much earlier in the process, so we wouldn't have these sorts of crazy problems where you're making something which is basically direct to landfill, pointless. And I spent a number of years there, and what was quite interesting, at the time when I joined IDEO, it was still really a design stroke engineering company doing all sorts of cool things, working for Apple, working for the early stage Microsoft, working on pacemakers, all sorts of electric cars, believe it or not, back in the early 90s this is. And the thing that we forget was, in the early 90s there was this enormous release of military technology that suddenly got taken on into the sort of public sphere because of the Cold War and the Berlin Wall had all, come down. And so things like GPS, all of these kind of amazing things. And so suddenly this was the kind of like the beginning, of that thrust in Silicon Valley and all these design companies going out. And what happened quite quickly was IDEO then became known as an innovation company, business innovation company, as opposed to a design company. And so we were then, I was then tasked with thinking much more about why are we making this product? What are the business conditions? What are the more external thoughts that we need to think about in the very early part of the process, rather than just thinking about form, function, behavior, but really kind of getting deep into that. And I stayed with those guys for about 10 years, came back to Europe and took on a more senior position there. And then what I really wanted to do at that point was to take all those ideas of innovation, human-centered design, and take those to the public sector. There had been a change of government in the late 90s, and there was a lot of public sector reform. So I started my own company, which at that time was called First Hand Experience. And again, working at that front end of the process, from whether it was FMCG, even looking at things like shoe polish. That sounds crazy, but
what did you do with shoe polish?
Shoe polish. What did I do with shoe polish? It was an interesting time because they needed to change the formulation, because the old formulation had to react to legislative changes for environmental reasons. But of course, the changing of the formula changed to how it worked and what the performance of it was. So then we had to kind of find out a new way to communicate, that this was a better idea and it's good for you, good for the consumer, good for the planet, all great. But also, look about, how you actually used it in the different applications. Now, you'd think, boot polish just goes on boots. It doesn't, it goes on all sorts of things, like jackets and other kind of bits and pieces. So anyway, it's a varied and interesting thing. I was very, very fortunate. And then I'm now going through my next version of what I want to do. And what I'm really interested now is in companies that have got decline on the mind. Successful companies, great legacy companies. They've been around at least 20 years, maybe 60 years, maybe even more. But they are also trying to react and keep up. They're also noticing things like new competitors coming along, their market going somewhere else, new technologies coming along. So there's always this constant thing about change. I know in this current context of COVID, you kind of think it's just like one change, but it's not. The world changes all the time, and there are sudden changes like the oil crisis, or the first dot-com crash, or the financial crisis, or all of these other things that happen. And businesses and other organizations, not just businesses, but third sector organizations, government organizations, have to react. The thing is that a lot of organizations find it really difficult to recover, reinvent, or rejuvenate themselves. And what happens is that they make some attempts at it, and they get stuck, and they get frustrated, and they get distracted, and they get exhausted. And my thing now is really focusing on these great companies, and instead of just taking that kind of assumption that, these companies just have to go away and become extinct, is no, they don't. If with the right help, they can re-find their next path of prosperity, their next cycle of doing something really, really good. But it's quite difficult for them to really kind of get to grips of like exactly what it is that's making them stuck. Now, I'll give you an example. So something that's been in the newspapers recently is a firm called Arcadia, Topshop, blah, 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 blah. And you had all sorts of talking heads on the radio going, they should have, gone digital. They should have looked at their
Yep.
real estate. They should have done all of these things, as though the people running those firms didn't know that. I mean, it's classic consultees, which is
Yes.
give me your watch and I'll tell you the time. I mean, so the interesting thing is what was actually stopping those businesses move forward? Why were they stuck? Why couldn't they react?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thompson, whole bunches of other kind of businesses, and Mothercare, many. And it's not just from my point of view of that it's interesting. The reality is that when these businesses go bust, people lose their jobs, communities get gutted. It's just this incredibly depressing attitude of it just can't be a different way. And I think for me, that's because it's partly because I think I'm a child of my time. When I was growing up, whole sections of business were being thrown on the scrap heap, literally in many instances. When you think back to the 80s and steel mills, coal, trains,
But
manufacturing.
It was kind of sectors, wasn't it, rather than individual businesses?
It was just so defeatist in terms of its ideology, which was, well, those people can just, get on and do something else. Well, it wasn't that blooming easy for them. And, 40 years later, communities are still suffering from those effects.
Yes.
So my thinking is, no, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way of changing that, that classic curve of, getting successful and decline, and flipping it and taking people back to a new sense of prosperity. But it's very hard for them to do that on their own, because you've got, especially if you've been a successful business, you've tasted success, and you're asking people to think completely different about what they make, how they make it, how they're led, how they communicate, what their culture is. Very, very difficult to kind of look internally and do that.
Yeah.
But that's what I bring to the table, is do that diagnosis, of figuring out what is stuck, and then help them.
Okay, and so playing devil's advocate here a bit.
Go
Yeah. I mean that is interesting. You talk about the consultant, kind of giving you their asking for the watch and then telling you what time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is. It sounds to me, and it'd be really interesting to hear what you have to say to that's kind of classic management consultancy. That's what management consultants do. They go into a situation where businesses are stuck, or there's some kind of impasse, there's some kind of bottleneck, and they try and unravel. Usually what they say is, you need to make redundancies here, or restructuring there, or do that. But what are you doing which is different from that? And where does your heritage as a designer, even though you say you're not really trained as a conventional designer, where does that formation feed into what you're doing now?
Because I think, to answer your question specifically, which is that, yes, it is management consultancy. And that is what I claim on my LinkedIn page now, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But it's a different way of going about it.
Okay.
Too often in traditional management consulting, it's a sausage machine version. They go do the same thing in each of the different organisations. It's very suity and booty, right? It's all very, very processy in that respect. Whereas what I do is start with the people. It's about doing the listening part of it, figuring out really what's going on. Bear in mind that for quite a lot of organisations, if you're running an organisation, you can actually be quite isolated from what's actually going on at the coalface, especially if things aren't going brilliantly at the moment, because people don't want to tell someone the bad news. And somehow what we have to do is create the conditions and permissions where people can have voice and can bring that voice to the problem much, much earlier on.
Yeah.
Now that's a difference. So I'll give so your classic version of how this works would be everyone sitting around a board table. There'd be either a PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet and some number crunching going on. And there'll be someone who will be talking across the table at someone.
Yeah.
And probably 60% of the people will be sitting in keeping quiet.
Yes.
When you take the kind of techniques that we use in the world of design and innovation, we start mapping things up on the wall. We start sketching, we saying, do you mean like this, or do you mean like this? What's the advantages of this one? What are the pros and cons of this going this approach, of that approach? Let's do some really simple version of some dot voting on the different things. So what you're doing is you're flattening out that hierarchy. You're letting people, you're creating the right mechanisms where people can actually contribute and contribute early in the process, rather than for something to be shoved on to an organisation and then suddenly they're reacting. And the other part of it is that, again, it goes back to the human part, is that when an organisation is, going through some sort of change or transformation or something else, the first thing, it's natural to think, well, how's that going to affect me? Am I going to lose status? Am I going to lose authority? Am I going to lose my team? Am I going to lose my job? Right? Now, unless you're sensitive and bring some empathy into that part of the process earlier on, then it just becomes a shove. It's not a pull and bringing people with you. And that's why so many of these things fail. When you look at the data is shocking. Less than 15% of CEOs think that their organisational change produced the results that they were promised. 15%. If you look at even digital transformations, right, the success rates are less than 30%. And that's for the digitally savvy ones. If you take all of those out, it drops between 4 and 11%.
So what you're saying is organisational transformation, business transformation, does not work. I mean, it's not working.
It's not got a great track record. And I think it's because they miss out the human element of finding out what's going on, and they set off in the wrong direction. They don't do the legwork at the beginning. So what happens, is they go off in a particular direction, spend a chunk of cash, and then find it's not working. Well, then that's quite hard to recover from. Whereas what we know in the world of design is that it's all about what you do at the beginning and how you making sure that you're working on the right problem, not the wrong problem.
But why is there so much resistance, Matt? Because I mean, I've worked in organisations and everything, and I've seen change processes and transformation programs, and I've also seen the kind of, the absolute resistance, from this kind of hierarchical, from the professions, from very, who don't, they do like the spreadsheets, they do like the kind of waterfall approach to management. They think there are a few people that hold the knowledge and the wisdom, and that can be imparted. And the idea that actually the solutions for change and for improvement can be found in different quarters and in different places, different ingredients being brought together, is very kind of, there's a lot of resistance to that. It's quite uncomfortable.
I think it's true, there can be resistance from different parts of the organisation or different old ways of working. But at the same time, and this brings it back to Ravensbourne particularly, is that for the last 5 years, of the 5 top skills that business leaders say they need, creativity is in the top 5. There's a change going on. Is that people who are running these businesses realise that in order to stay current and relevant, you need to be creative in the boardroom. And that's a big, big change, I think. And for me, it takes it back to the story you asked me right at the beginning, which is, I think it's almost better that people are coming here to learn creative skills as well as a craft. And that you may well end up in a completely different place. But those creative skills, just that ability to listen to different points of view, to visualize, to prototype, to make things real before they're real, to take constructive critique and give constructive critique. These are the things that you learn in a good school like this one. Right? When I teach up at Judge Business School, and it's all the MBAs. These things are not taught. You're taught how to do a particular process.
Yes.
And I tell you, up at Judge Business School, I go there every year, and and for the last 4 or 5 years, and I do it about twice a year. It's one of their top-rated courses.
The creative?
The one where we teach creativity
Right.
and design thinking,
Yeah.
how to come up with new approaches and stuff.
Yes.
Because we actually get people to do these activities.
Yes.
We get them to go out and talk to end users. We get them to prototype in various different ways.
Yeah.
We get them to kind of show how to pitch
Yes, yes.
with the idea of the audience. We do
Yeah.
all of these different things, and they do sort of like aha moments.
Yes.
That there's some other ways that complement. It's not an either or. That complements some of the other techniques.
Yes.
And so I don't want to give you the wrong impression, and say, I think all those other ways should be thrown away.
Yeah.
No.
No.
It's about complementing.
Complementing,
And what
yeah.
happens if you complement is that you end up with a better result. And hopefully you end up making something that the world actually needs and wants. And again, going back to the paper towel dispenser, not straight to landfill or failure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah.
It's just a different thing.
It's interesting though, Matt, isn't it? Because I mean, I find that that a lot of there is a kind of perception. There are two perceptions, I would say. One of that creativity is not something you can necessarily learn. It's something you're kind of born with. It's innate. And so, how do you actually learn about creativity? So, there are creative people and then there are non-creative people. So that's a bit of a, an assumption, and would love to get your views on that. There's a world view. And the other thing is creativity is either fluffy or it's dangerous. It's kind of, it's a little bit kind of too challenging. We don't want to get anywhere near the creatives. I mean, how do you deal with that when you're working in, say, a big organization which is used to the kind of the spreadsheets, the waterfall approach to management, hierarchies, business as usual rather than business as unusual?
You show by doing is what you also, who's the guy? Robinson.
Ken Robinson.
Ken Robinson.
Yes.
All right. Ken Robinson, bless his cotton socks, he died recently.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yes, regretfully so. He is the most watched TED Talk ever.
Yes.
Millions and millions of views. So I do think things are changing, right? I mean, I do think that, yes, there's probably an old guard, right? Probably people my age, but, business is now being, run by people who have come through a completely different notion of education and their views on creativity. And I mean, I'm not sure that I accept your premise that that businesses reject it. Actually, I actually get a completely a different feeling.
Okay.
Is that, and they recognise that it takes a different kind of active and progressive leadership and approach to actually pull this stuff off. Yeah, maybe it's just who I hang. I think it's partly, actually, there was a big change when Web 2.0 came on, and suddenly the customer had voice.
Yes.
There was a time when I had to persuade people that it might make sense to listen to the customer as part of their process. At least half of my career probably was spent doing that. When Web 2.0 came on, and then developed into more sophisticated social media.
And we're talking about social media,
Yeah, because the Web 2.0, that was the big change, was that it was, both ways and in real time, as opposed to static websites, right? Is that I don't think there's a business on the planet now where you have to go and persuade them that it might be a good idea if you actually talked to your customers and involved them in the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's changed a lot. I think, and I suppose, in the world of, when you think about Twitter and other platforms are available, the power of a comment or a thread or a mistake can be so significant in terms of a loss of reputation.
Yes.
contradiction. So what it means is that perhaps in the old days, of course, there was market research, but it all came back in pie charts, you know, bar charts and aggregated data. And the sort of stuff that we used to do, which was all kind of like insight and inspiration based, you know, sometimes could get overlooked or choose to ignore it. These days, I just don't think people have that same mindset.
Yes.
I think they're much more sophisticated.
Yes.
They're much more tuned in.
So it is all, they're looking for the interactivity, they're trying to anticipate how they can interact, companies trying to interact both with markets but also their internal markets, employees and so the whole area of culture is important.
Yeah, I mean, what was it? Slack was sold for how many billion? I can't remember who bought it yesterday or the day before.
Yes.
But, you know, I think there's a very different mindset. I mean, of course, there are laggards and there are people, you know, who are, you know, spearheading things. But I think generally, I think it's really important to realise. Sorry, this sounds passionate. You know, that the world is different out in business, and the boardrooms are different, and they know that they're deficient in some areas in terms of the techniques that they need in order to ensure their future survival.
Yes, yes.
going forwards.
Yeah, and these techniques don't necessarily have to be complex, sophisticated, high tech. The
simpler they are, the better.
Yes.
I mean, it's easy to say, okay, okay, everyone has a voice in this room, all right. Well, you know, that's easy. It's harder to actually pull it off.
Yes.
And it's much better, you know, when you've done your homework, and you've done your research, and you've looked at the competitors, and you've done some benchmarking, and you've looked around, and you've taken the time to create some stimulus materials that people can look at, so we all know we're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
It's one of the other difficulties that we have, you know, when we're all on our laptops or it's a projector, is you can't scan, you can't see the patterns, you can't, you know, you can't work with the complex materials. But even just by going through those processes of bringing it to life in all that's richness, whether that's showing things as a whole or making something and getting it, all of that good stuff, the more tangible it is, the less mystery and you know, wizardry around it. I think the more effective it is at people being able to go, I'm not sure about that one. I'm not sure that's us.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
What? Thank you for that. That's what do you think about that?
Yes.
It means that people can do reflection.
Yes.
Right. And it goes back to the two words, a constructive critique. Now, that's another one that's easy to say, because too often in too many organisations, it's just critique. That's rubbish. Right. Constructive critique is and orchestrating that requires some skills. Just sort of skills that you have, these people have, your students down there have. All of those good things. You have to learn it and practice it. And once you've gone around the block a few times and see the limitations of it, you know, where it gets a bit, you know, you get good at it.
Yeah. And this constructive critique and this ability to unpack situations, but bringing people with you, you know, bringing people with you is very important.
I mean, thing I should mention is that in the firms that I work for, it's not like there's a lack of ideas that are out there. In fact, the problem is more typically there are too many ideas about what can be done, but some of those ideas are either contradictory or conflicting. But without the right help, what happens is this bashing heads together, right? So what we have to do, first of all, is make sure that there's space for those ideas to be brought out into the open, talked about, and coming out from a point of view is that it's not because it's not a good idea, but it's not right for this brand at this time where we are in the business and moving forward. Maybe that one gets shunted along to version 2.0 or 3.0 or some other version. And often, you know, the trick for doing that is actually about bringing external perspective in.
Yes. Yeah.
And they learn to listen. And again, it's an easy thing to say, you know, listen, but people do get defensive. If
Yeah.
if you immediately criticise something, people get defensive,
Yeah.
right? So we have to accept that it's an emotional,
It's
thing.
yeah, but we are emotional beings, aren't we? I mean,
and
yeah.
again, I think these
Yeah.
are the sorts of things that you learn when
Yeah.
you come to a good college and you go through a creative process.
Yes.
Someone might walk by and go, "Oh, I don't quite get that." And
Yes.
instead of going, off and off and half, you learn to go.
Yeah.
Tell me some more.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, one of the things we do, as you know, is learning about active listening. Really how deep,
Yeah.
immersive, active listening.
Yeah.
Um,
In fact,
and-
it's lesson one.
Yeah, it
on
is
your-
lesson.
on your-
It
on
is
your
lesson
course.
one, and it's something everybody takes for granted. We think we're all listeners, but actually, how to really listen with intent is very different. The other thing I think is very interesting, which I know you're very keen on, is how to kind of craft those incisive questions. So to be able to craft incisive questions which will kind of bring people with you in a different way, but make people feel that they own the subject, they're part of the subject. I mean, what some of these are the kind of the toolkits, if you like, the kind of the part of the trade of designers. I mean, are there things that come to mind that you think definitely have to be taught if you want to work in this area?
I think if you want to be a good creative, you do need some rigor around it,
Yes.
and you do need some discipline, and you do need to sometimes leave your ego at the door. Now, in some ways, what's slightly perverse about this is that in your early career, you're much more willing to do that. What is quite odd is that as you go further down your career, somehow that sort of can evaporate because you become more senior. I think the really good ones are the ones who manage to hang on to it.
Yes.
And the best creative leaders, I think are the ones who, when they set out and they ask people to go and do something, they go, "God, I wasn't expecting that to happen. Fantastic! You just proved me wrong. That's you are doing a really, really, really good job. I'm not just following my assumptions and preconceptions. You're challenging them, right? And being prepared to be wrong,
Yes.
is absolutely critical. I mean, there comes a part in the process where hopefully you're a lot less wrong than when you were at the beginning.
Yeah.
But again, that goes back to when you do it in the process, right? So do your learning early when it's cheap to get it wrong, so that you figure out where your destination point is, and you're doing it with a team's point of view. Because making anything these days, is a team sport.
Yes.
Right?
Collaboration.
It's a collaboration, and quite often with people who have completely different agendas and remits. So as you know, I was working in banking for a while back, and what was really fascinating was the appetite for risk. Now, if you're in risk and compliance and making sure that you're following all the legal stuff, you've clearly got one set of things that you're thinking about. If you're in new product development, marketing, and everything else, you've got a slightly different. Or somehow those two worlds have got to combine.
Yes.
And one of the things that I did in one of the organisations was brought the risk and compliance people into the design studio and walked them through the process. And talked about gating, go, no-goes, all of those things. And suddenly, what they realised was actually this gating and kind of narrowing down possibilities through trial and error actually mitigated risk rather than was something that was going to create. And so suddenly we made people who might have been a blocker into an advocate.
But that's building rapport with people. It's building trust. It's confidence. I mean, there's
got to do the legwork.
You've
got to do the legwork and find out people and talk to them on their own terms.
Yeah.
Don't go in and lay down your agenda, go in and find out what their agenda is first, and do some listening of your own, and then after that, maybe you can make some offers, you know, and gestures. To, hey, I'm going to go and see a customer next week. Fancy coming along? Well, I've never done that before. Oh, that'd be interesting. Yeah, so no problem. You know, just, you know, if it only is 45 minutes.
So Matt, I mean, after it's, and because it's fascinating. No, because it is fascinating. It's like, it's so interesting because what we're talking about is you know, how organizations can transform, how they can kind of replenish, how they can refresh, and how they can, you know, face up to the challenges of, you know, a fast-moving world and everything. And the centrality and the vital role that design and creativity can play. And it is interesting seeing this world of business and organizational change and the world of creativity coming together, because traditionally, I mean, when I was at kind of at university and everything, creativity was for the creatives and business was for, you know, the clever ones who wanted to make money and everything. And if you were kind of into creativity, it was like, oh, a bit artsy-fartsy and everything. And now those two worlds are really, really coming together. And this is a huge challenge for a higher education institution like Ravensbourne. Like, how do you teach these things? How do you kind of, you know, enable a training and an experience which will give young people those skills, not just those skills, but that mindset.
Which mindset do you mean?
With the mindset of learning how to bring disparate ideas around creativity and around business together, so that you create this new kind of almost like a recipe.
I don't think you guys here are slouches at doing that at all.
No,
I think
well,
you've been doing that doing that for years.
Yes. But I know I wouldn't say we're slouches at all, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge of bringing these two worlds together, you know, in a curriculum, which is so interesting. I mean, it's a very creative challenge.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, one of the things that we do on your course is we give applied briefs, right? Which we draw. I mean, they might be from a charity, they might be from a government organisation, they might be from a business, and we hook them up with the stakeholders in that business, and we guide them through that process. And for some, they get the whiff of it and they like it, and for some, it's not for them. But that's the point, right? I mean, I'm not saying that everybody should be doing this. You know, crikey, I mean, we need you know, great craftspeople, you know, as much as we've always done. It's just that there are other paths open that you might fall down, you know, decide to pursue. And it depends, you know, like, you know, what your mindset is. You know, I mean, some people, you know, for me at the moment, you know, working with businesses that are in decline, I see as a creative process. And the upside of it is people don't lose their jobs. Right? Communities don't get gutted. You know, because bear in mind that, you know, for a lot of businesses, they are the bread giver in that whole town. That still exists. If you look across the United States, the flyover states, if you look across the Mittelstadt, you look across Switzerland, you look into, you know, there are big businesses that, you know, whole communities depend on. Now, you know, for me, that's that's a win. You know, so I guess what I'm saying is that I'm less interested in what's everyone else finds fashionable, which is the world of startups and unicorns and hockey stick growth and all of that. You know, I spent sort of 10 years in that space. But I think I discovered that it wasn't rewarding, and you know, to be able to say, well, I worked on something with a valuation and from £1 million to £10 million to 100, you know, like, I mean, it's cool, but it didn't rock my boat. And so I decided, you know, I got intrigued by that, and you know, decided to kind of go down, you know, a different path. And is this different path that is it different from, you know, you wrote your book, was it about 2 years ago or three? That, 2 years ago, and everything. Do you think there's been a radical departure that you've made since that time, since the writing of your book? Do you think you're now into a very different space? Well, the book was about human-centered design. the bit the constant thread is I've always been interested in the people part of it.
Yes.
So I think it's a deviation, perhaps. Doesn't sound too weird. It's a deviation, but it's still the ethic. The ethic through my whole working life has always been based around that interest in people. Have I told you the story about why I got interested in human-centered design? And
tell me again if you have.
I'm going to bore you to death.
Yeah.
But at one point in my life, what I thought I wanted to do
Yes.
was build dams so that I could irrigate arid land and people could be fed. That's what I thought.
Well, like civil engineering or something.
So my first foray into looking for a university place was into civil engineering.
Right.
And what I discovered, it had nothing to do with people at all. It was about tensile strength of steel and compressibility of concrete and, you know, all of these things. And I was like, oh. Anyway, shortly after I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do, I met someone. And they said, do you know why there's almost always a mirror next to a lift?
Yeah.
And I went, no, why is that? And they go, the reason why they put a mirror there is to distract you whilst you're waiting for the lift. So you're occupied. So you're not being all antsy. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. Is that, I was always interested in, you know, kind of design and, you know, form. But then this whole new world of like, wow. So actually through design, and if you get inside people's heads, you can do something so much better, so much more interesting, which of course in later years, you know, flows out in the world of, well, it's all very well to make something, but how do people adopt it? How do they choose it? How do they talk to other people about it and advocate it to others? You must have one of those.
Yes.
And if you're not thinking, you know, that way, then I think you're missing a trick. It's the same thing if you're a film student, you know, in terms of, you know, how you build those trailers and what that image is and how you build up that audience and that interest and making it different. I think Train Spotting, you know, was one of the first ones where they figured out the marketing campaign for the film before they finished the final edit.
Amazing.
That's the folklore I've heard.
Right.
Anyways.
Yes.
I mean,
So they thought about who's going to watch it, how they're going to experience it.
You know, what the whole whole narrative around it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know. The human-centered, the book, you know, it's called People Shaped. Yeah. And it was, the other reason why I did the book was because I was kind of sick of all the design books being kind of beauty shots about when everything went perfectly. Yes. And I was interested to share with people how difficult making new stuff is. Yes. Making the next new thing. That, you know, it's an unclear path to getting, and I wanted to out that as a real thing. So that's why there are the 10 tales in it, and the tricks that I learned along the way, so that I wouldn't make people wouldn't have to make the same catalogue of mistakes that I made throughout my career. So you know, I mean, I think truth. One of the things, you know, creating room for the truth to come out, and part of my role now is almost to deliver a bit of truth serum into the organisation, some honest talk about what's really going on, and making sure, thinking very carefully about how you deliver either the good sides or sometimes the not so good. Yes. Because you know, you're not trying to antagonise people, but unless you're working with evidence and truth, and you're figuring out a way to get that truth into the heads of the decision makers who need to move forward, then you're not going to be successful. And it's all about what's going to be successful. Right? How do we get this company that's stuck and unlock them and help them move forward to a positive future? And having that purposeful intent. That's what, you know, that's what gets me up out of bed in the morning. All right. Matt, that's fantastic. One final question, and thank you. Why? No. Go on. No, I mean, this is a simple question. I mean, so I'm sure the people who'll be watching this conversation and everything will be people considering
you know, embarking upon a postgraduate course in design thinking, in service design and everything. I mean, do you have any kind of, you know, nuggets of wisdom to say to those starting out in a career, or trying to maybe repurpose what they're doing already, and then you know, just as you did with civil engineering and going into kind of, you know, design? Is there anything you would like to say to young people at the beginning of their journey?
The pages of the book are blank.
The pages of the book are blank.
It's up to you to fill them in.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult. I mean, you know, I was like, you know, the tail end of the boomers. Hey, boomer.
Yeah.
You know, where my education was paid for.
Yes. Yes.
Students today, I mean, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
That there's naturally a temptation to be very solution, end goal oriented about, I'm going to start here and I'm going to end up there. That's fine, you know, for a lot of people. But for others, it's more, the future is less clear. You might just find yourself going off in a different direction. The things that you learned, you might just find you can apply in places you hadn't even thought of.
Yes.
Yet. And for this wonderful generation, which I'm full of optimism for, I think they're, you know, fantastic. There are so many problems that we need, you know, that are going to need figuring out, and need good, creative, passionate, bright minds to address. You know, yeah, I mean, learn and if you can, try not to think too much about getting pigeonholed too early in your course.
Yes.
Even at the end of it, you know, and you get your first job, your next one might be completely different.
Yes.
And your next one after that might be completely different.
Yeah.
Discovering that maybe the path that you thought you were on isn't the right one anymore.
Yeah.
That shows character to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Not weakness. So
Lovely.
I would encourage people
So it's
to
kind of,
embrace that.
yeah. So it's like learn, but also unlearn as well. You know, and
Well, or repurpose.
repurpose.
You know,
yeah.
just keep your options open.
Yeah.
If you can, and as easily said.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
But the future is a funny old thing.
Yeah.
You never know what it's going to kick up.
On that note, Matt, thank you so much indeed. I mean, it's wonderful to see you, and wonderful, as always, to talk to you. So I'd just like to say thank you for watching this on behalf of Ravensbourne University, London, and I do hope that you will join us in our next In Conversation shortly. Thank you. That's great.